Well, do you know where the caddy master is? He isn't here yet this morning. Oh. For a moment, this baffled her. She stood alternately on her right and left foot. We'd like to get a caddy, said the nurse. Mrs. Mortimer Jones sent us out to play golf, and we don't know how without we get a caddy. Here she was stopped by an ominous glance from Miss Jones, followed immediately by the smile. There aren't any caddies here except me, said Dexter to the nurse, and I got to stay here in charge until the caddy master gets here. Oh. Miss Jones and her retinue now withdrew, and at a proper distance from Dexter became involved in a heated conversation, which was concluded by Miss Jones taking one of the clubs and hitting it on the ground with violence. For further emphasis, she raised it again and was about to bring it down smartly upon the nurse's bosom when the nurse seized the club and twisted it from her hands. You little mean old thing! Cried Miss Jones wildly. Another argument ensued. Realizing that the elements of the comedy were implied in the scene, Dexter several times began to laugh, but each time restrained the laugh before it reached audibility. He could not resist the monstrous conviction that the little girl was justified in beating the nurse. The situation was resolved by the fortuitous appearance of the caddy master, who was appealed to immediately by the nurse. Miss Jones is to have a little caddy, and this one says he can't go. Mr. McKenna said I was to wait here until you came, said Dexter quickly. Well, he's here now, Miss Jones smiled cheerfully at the caddy master. Then she dropped her bag and set off at a haughty mince toward the first tee. Well, the caddy master turned to Dexter, what are you standing there like a dummy for? Go pick up the young ladies' clubs. I don't think I'll go out today, said Dexter. You don't? I think I'll quit. The enormity of his decision frightened him. He was a favorite caddy, and the $30 a month he earned through the summer were not to be made elsewhere around the lake. But he had received a strong emotional shock, and his perturbation required a violent and immediate outlet. It is not so simple as that either. As so frequently would be the case in the future, Dexter was unconsciously dictated to by his winter dreams. Now, of course, the quality and the seasonability of these winter dreams varied, but the stuff of them remained. They persuaded Dexter several years later to pass up a business course at the State University. His father, prospering now, would have paid his way, for the precarious advantage of attending an older and more famous university in the East, where he was bothered by his scanty funds. But do not get the impression, because his winter dreams happened to be concerned at first with musings on the rich, that there was anything merely snobbish in the boy. He wanted not association with glittering things and glittering people. He wanted the glittering things themselves. Often he reached out for the best without knowing why he wanted it. And sometimes he ran up against the mysterious denials and prohibitions in which life indulges. It is with one of those denials, and not with his career as a whole, that this story deals. He made money. It was rather amazing. After college, he went to the city from which Black Bear Lake draws its wealthy patrons. When he was only 23 and had been there not quite 2 years, there were already people who liked to say, "Now there's a boy." All about him, rich men's sons were peddling bonds precariously, or investing patrimonies precariously, or plodding through the 24 volumes of the George Washington commercial course. But Dexter borrowed $1,000 on his college degree and his confident mouth, and bought a partnership in a laundry. It was a small laundry when he went into it, but Dexter made a specialty of learning how the English washed fine woolen golf stockings without shrinking them, and within a year he was catering to the trade that wore knickerbockers. Men were insisting that their Shetland hose and sweaters go to his laundry. just as they had insisted on a caddy who could find golf balls. A little later, he was doing their wives' lingerie as well, and running 5 branches in different parts of the city. Before he was 27, he owned the largest string of laundries in his section of the country. It was then that he sold out and went to New York. But the part of his story that concerns us goes back to the days when he was making his first big success. When he was 23, Mr. Hart, one of the gray-haired men who liked to say, "Now there's a boy," gave him a guest card to the...
We'll just pause for a moment just to make sure that we're on board here at level 1. You're on page 735 in the 2nd chapter now. And already Fitzgerald has set it up for us. We've got 2 different kinds of understandings of character types, as we said, round and flat. Clearly, Dexter is going to be a very round character. We're going to learn a lot about him. He starts out as a caddy. He's poor. Starts out as a caddy in a golf course. And he is going to rise to prominence. Notice he does it through education. He does it through hard work. This will be the foundational understandings of what the American dream is all about, right? You get a good education and you work really hard. It's going to be interesting to watch what it is that as Dexter gains his wealth, what it is that ultimately he finally really wants. It will be significant, of course, that a girl will have to be involved. We'll now meet that girl, but we've already actually met her, ironically enough. Follow along. Here we go.
To the Sherry Island Golf Club for a weekend. So he signed his name one day on the register, and that afternoon played golf in a foursome with Mr. Hart and Mr. Sandwood and Mr. T.A. Hedrick. He did not consider it necessary to remark that he had once carried Mr. Hart's bag over this same links, and that he knew every trap and gully with his eyes shut, but he found himself glancing at the 4 caddies who trailed them, trying to catch a gleam or gesture that would remind him of himself, that would lessen the gap which lay between his present and his past. It was a curious day, slashed abruptly with fleeting familiar impressions. One minute, he had the sense of being a trespasser. In the next, he was impressed by the tremendous superiority he felt toward Mr. T.A. Hedrick, who was a bore and not even a good golfer anymore. Then, because of a ball Mr. Hart lost near the 15th green, an enormous thing happened. While they were searching the stiff grasses of the rough, there was a clear call of 4 from behind a hill in their rear. And as they all turned abruptly from their search, a bright new ball sliced abruptly over the hill and caught Mr. T.A. Hedrick in the abdomen. "By gad," cried Mr. T.A. Hedrick. "They ought to put some of these crazy women off the course. It's getting to be outrageous." A head and a voice came up together over the hill. "Do you mind if we go through?" "You hit me in the stomach," declared Mr. Hedrick wildly. "Did I?" The girl approached the group of men. "I'm sorry, I yelled 4. Her glance fell casually on each of the men, then scanned the fairway for her ball. "Did I bounce into the rough?" It was impossible to determine whether this question was ingenuous or malicious. In a moment, however, she left no doubt, for as her partner came up over the hill, she called cheerfully, "Here I am. I'd have gone on the green except that I hit something." As she took her stance for a short, mashy shot, Dexter looked at her closely. She wore a blue gingham dress, rimmed at throat and shoulders with a white edging that accentuated her tan. The quality of exaggeration, of thinness, which had made her passionate eyes and down-turning mouth absurd at 11, was gone now. She was arrestingly beautiful. The color in her cheeks was centered like the color in a picture. It was not a high color, but a sort of fluctuating and feverish warmth, so shaded that it seemed at any moment it would recede and disappear. This color and the mobility of her mouth gave a continual impression of flux, of intense life, of passionate vitality, balanced only partially by the sad luxury of her eyes. She swung her mashie impatiently and without interest, pitching the ball into a sand pit on the other side of the green. With a quick, insincere smile and a careless "thank you," she went on after it. "That Judy Jones," remarked Mr. Hedrick on the next tee as they waited some moments for her to play on ahead. "All she needs is to be turned up and spanked for 6 months and then to be married off to an old-fashioned cavalry captain." "My, she's good-looking," said Mr. Sandwood, who was just over 30. "Good-looking," cried Mr. Hedrick contemptuously. "She always looks as if she wanted to be kissed, turning those big cow eyes on every calf in town." It was doubtful if Mr. Hedrick intended a reference to the maternal instinct. "She'd play pretty good golf if she'd try," said Mr. Sandwood. "She has no form," said Mr. Hedrick solemnly. "She has a nice figure," said Mr. Sandwood. "Better thank the Lord she doesn't drive a swifter ball," said Mr. Hart, winking at Dexter. Later in the afternoon, the sun went down with a riotous swirl of gold and varying blues and scarlets, and left the day rustling night of the western summer. Dexter watched from the veranda of the golf club, watched the even overlap of the waters in the little wind, silver molasses under the harvest moon. Then the moon held a finger to her lips, and the lake became a clear pool, pale and quiet. Dexter put on his bathing suit and swam out to the farthest raft, where he stretched dripping on the wet canvas of the springboard. There was a fish jumping, and a star shining, and the lights around the lake were gleaming. Over on a dark peninsula, a piano was playing the songs of last summer and of summers before that. Songs from Chin Chin and the Count of Luxembourg and the Chocolate Soldier. And because the sound of a piano over a stretch of water had always seemed beautiful to Dexter, he lay perfectly quiet and listened. The tune the piano was playing at that moment had been gay and new 5 years before, when Dexter was a sophomore at college. They had played it at a prom once when he could not afford the luxury of proms, and he had stood outside the gymnasium and listened. The sound of the tune precipitated in him a sort of ecstasy, and it was with that ecstasy he viewed what happened to him now. It was a mood of intense appreciation, a sense that, for once, he was magnificently attuned to life, and that everything about him was radiating a brightness and a glamour he might never know again. A low, pale oblong detached itself suddenly from the darkness of the island, spitting forth the reverberate sound of a racing motorboat. 2 white streamers of cleft water rolled themselves out behind it, and almost immediately the boat was beside him, drowning out the hot tinkle of the piano in the drone of its spray. Dexter, raising himself on his arms, was aware of a figure standing at the wheel, of 2 dark eyes regarding him over the lengthening space of water. Then the boat had gone by and was sweeping in an immense and purposeless circle of spray, round and round in the middle of the lake. With equal eccentricity, one of the circles flattened out and headed back toward the raft. "Who's that?" she called, shutting off her motor. She was so near now that Dexter could see her bathing suit, which consisted apparently of pink rompers. The nose of the boat bumped the raft, and as the latter tilted rakishly, he was precipitated toward her. With different degrees of interest, they recognized each other. "Aren't you one of those men we played through this afternoon?" she demanded. He was. "Well, do you know how to drive a motorboat? Because if you do, I wish you'd drive this one so I can ride on the surfboard behind. My name is Judy Jones." She favored him with an absurd smirk, rather what tried to be a smirk, for twist her mouth as she might, it was not grotesque, it was merely beautiful. "And I live in a house over there on the island, and in that house there's a man waiting for me. When he drove up at the door, I drove out of the dock because he says I'm his ideal." There was a fish jumping and a star shining, and the lights around the lake were gleaming. Dexter sat beside Judy Jones, and she explained how her boat was driven. Then she was in the water, swimming to the floating surfboard with a sinuous crawl. Watching her was without effort to the eye, watching a branch waving or a seagull flying. Her arms, burned to butternut, moved sinuously among the dull platinum ripples, elbow appearing first, casting the forearm back with a cadence of falling water, then reaching out and down, stabbing a path ahead. They moved out into the lake. Turning, Dexter saw that she was kneeling on the low rear of the now up-tilted surfboard. "Go faster," she called, "fast as it'll go." Obediently, he jammed the lever forward, and the white spray mounted at the bow. When he looked around again, the girl was standing up on the rushing board, her arms spread wide, her eyes lifted toward the moon. "It's awful cold," she shouted. "What's your name?" He told her. "Well, why don't you come to dinner tomorrow night?" His heart turned over like the flywheel of the boat, and for the second time her casual whim gave a new direction to his life. Next evening, while...
Let's pause for a moment now and come back to your notes. Let's make a couple of quick observations here about what do you want to say about Judy Jones. Jot down a couple of things right away that you will say about this girl in this story. Now as a woman, right? She starts out as a little girl in the story, but clearly she's going to be the love interest of Dexter, no question. But she also is representative of something for Dexter. What is that something? Right? Notice we're told here that when he recognizes her, he has a certain kind of powerful emotional response. But why? Is it simply that she's stunningly physically beautiful, or is there something else in your estimation going on there? All right, I'm on page 740 with you, and we'll now get to part 3 and the heart of the story as Dexter and Judy begin to know each other.
While he waited for her to come downstairs, Dexter peopled the soft, deep summer room and the sun porch that opened from it with the men who had already loved Judy Jones. He knew the sort of men they were, the men who, when he first went to college, had entered from the great prep schools with graceful clothes and the deep tan of healthy summers. He had seen that, in one sense, he was better than these men. He was newer and stronger. Yet, in acknowledging to himself that he wished his children to be like them, he was admitting that he was but the rough, strong stuff from which they eternally sprang. When the time had come for him to wear good clothes, he had known who were the best tailors in America, and the best tailors in America had made him the suit he wore this evening. He had acquired that particular reserve peculiar to his university that set it off from other universities. He recognized the value to him of such a mannerism, and he had adopted it. He knew that to be careless in dress and manner required more confidence than to be careful. But carelessness was for his children. His mother's name had been Crimslick. She was a bohemian of the peasant class, and she had talked broken English to the end of her days. Her son must keep to the set patterns.
The Life You Save May Be Your Own by Flannery O'Connor. The